Um, okay, so I'm super psyched about this. The two women seated to my right are on the short list of people I would gladly lie down on train tracks for. And so I've pulled rank and demanded that I introduce them so I can have the honor of doing so. On my far right is Dr. Faye Ginsburg, who's a colleague of mine at NYU. Faye Ginsburg is a David B. Chrysler Professor of Anthropology at NYU, where she's also the director of the Center for Media, Culture, and History, co-director of the NYU Council for the Study of Disability, and co-director of the Center for Religion and Media. Prize-winning author, editor of 4 I think that's supposed to say books. Her research focuses on movement for social transformation, from her early work on abortion activists to her longstanding research on indigenous media to her current work with Raina Rapp on cultural innovation and learning disabilities. She collaborated for several years with Lawrence Carter Long on the This screening series at NYU and is on the advisory board of the Real Abilities Film Festival. She's parent to a daughter with a rare degenerative genetic condition, familial I'm going to say this wrong, dysautonomia, thank you, and is vice president of the Familial Dysautonomia Foundation. To Faye's left is Sara Hendren. Sara Hendren is a colleague of ours at Olin College, up outside of Boston, which if I didn't work at NYU Engineering, I would say was the coolest engineering school in the world. And Sara Hendren is an artist and design researcher whose work engages adaptive and assistive technologies, prosthetics, inclusive design, accessible architecture, and related ideas. Her work has been exhibited in the United States and abroad and is held in a permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And her writing and design work has appeared in the Boston Globe, the Atlantic, Tech, Fastco Design on National Public Radio, among others. Work at various stages include ramp designs for wheelchair users and skateboarders, low-tech assistive devices, the long-running Accessible Icon Project, which we have on this floor, which she co-founded, and Mobility on Mars. She lectures widely and formally taught at the Rhode Island School of Design. She runs the Abler website, so please give a warm welcome to Faye Ginsburg and Sara Hendren.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks for having us here. It's a super honor, and I have to say I'll try not to be awkward and starstruck with Faye Ginsburg, whose work makes mine possible. She's among a number of senior scholars in disability studies, which is kind of everywhere and nowhere. Disability studies is kind of throughout disciplines. It's a way of kind of a lens, a way of working more than it is a field, so I'm glad to be here. And we're just going to try to talk as quickly as possible so that we can talk together and talk with you about what may be on your minds about disability and technology broadly conceived. So I'll just show you a couple of projects, things that I do. And that is, so this is a screenshot of Olin College where I work. It is a tiny little place that you might not have heard of because we've only been around 12 years, 350 students total. And we try to root engineering, recover for engineering, a kind of human-centered and human-based applied mindset. I can talk more about that. So I teach a class called Investigating Normal, which is also a kind of disposition that drives my work, that is taking a truly investigative stance about culturally inherited ideas of normalcy and so on. Abler is a website that I've been running for a bunch of years now, collecting and commenting on the fields of prosthetics and assistive and adaptive, what are called assistive and adaptive technologies, wearable technologies, augmentations, proxies, all these things that live together. I'm interested in technologies that, I work in an engineering context, which is of course oriented paradigmatically around problem solving and solution finding. And I'm interested in having engineering in this moment in particular in history also ask questions at the same time that it may solve some problems if we think about disability and adapting the environment for all kinds of bodies. So in other words, helping us to both make a more inclusive world, yes, with a problem-solving mindset, but also to help us ask better questions about each other, about the stories we tell about one another, about the kind of world that this architecture and infrastructure and education system and economy, what it honors and who can thrive in it and who can't. So let me just give you a couple. I do a whole lot of things, but let me just give you a couple of examples. This is a recent project. This is Cindy, who's a collaborator with myself and an anthropologist colleague of mine named Katrin Lynch. Cindy had a heart attack at age 60 and a lot of medical complications and a 6-month coma that resulted in her losing all of her 10 digits on her hands and also both of her lower legs. So she's a multiple amputee. So she woke up, she was lucky to survive this event, and she woke up in a profoundly altered body. So in the 5 years since then, she's been adapting the world, and so I'll tell you a little bit more about that. This engineering at home is what this project became. Katrin Lynch, my colleague, and I built a kind of gonzo archive on a website of all the things that Cindy has built for to make her life possible. Lots of low-tech tools like this. And why? Well, this is the $90,000 myoelectric prosthetic arm and hand that Cindy qualified for because of having lost these digits, and it was a tremendous, enormously bureaucratic process to get insurance to pay for this hand. She got trained to do it, flown out to the facility and so on. And it turns out that this thing is sitting and collecting dust in a closet in her house. It's so heavy, it's so cumbersome, and it's, while a feat of engineering and no doubt has been transformational for some people, for Cindy it's been absolutely a non-starter as a technology. But you'd never know this from the popular press about prosthetics because this is all the shiny, sort of gee whiz sort of celebration that sort of journalism will point to when it talks about the next generation of wearables and erasing disability and so on. But this thing, which is, again, the sort of paramount of engineering, doesn't do anything for Cindy, while this thing does. This is like pennies of a silicone cap that was fitted precisely for Cindy's right hand. And it's got this pen affixed through it at this precise angle. And not only can Cindy write, but she can write in her handwriting. This is her recognizable handwriting that she can do. Now, we live in a time when speech to text is actually really good. The fidelity is great. Does she need to write anymore? She doesn't, but she wants to. It matters a lot to her that she writes thank you notes, for instance. That's something that she feels like is part of who she is and how she behaves in the world. So to be given back her handwriting was a way of giving her back a kind of agency. And it was done, again, for literally just pennies with her prosthetist who came up with this ingenious, like, oh, we could take a few scraps of this silicone and we could do this. So this website, Engineering at Home, has all these verbs written in Cindy's handwriting of all these little daily tasks that she needs to get done to do her kind of self-care and to navigate in the world. And we thought what we would do is try to give the most elegant design treatment to these deceptively humble objects, right? Because whereas the sort of the new and shiny $90,000 arm is doing nothing for her, the humility of a little cap like this, we got these like super industrial designy, try to just bring the language of design, the sophisticated language of design, to show people this thing, which is kind of hiding in plain sight as a little hack, but in fact is this making her life really possible. And so this is the fork version of that pen cap. Same thing. She's got a knife, she's got a pen, she's got a fork that she can take and do these kind of daily tasks that are fitted for her exactly. Or this kind of thing, this kind of rubber tubing that lets her do something that, again, is really important to her, to put on her own makeup. It's one fewer thing that she can do. It's one more thing that she can do for herself and something that she cared about doing herself. She lives interdependently, of course, with her husband and her family and with great medical care, but getting these kinds of daily tasks done was really important to her. Or like this kind of thing. This was all Cindy's, kind of own hack, which was just like, I need to open that, peanut butter jar or like face cream. What can I do? What can I do? Like, I can't use that $90,000 arm. Oh, I know what I need. A $1 peel and stick hook. That's what I need to make that thing go. So like, ain't no Brooklyn hipster hacker situation. Do you know what I mean? Like, here's an unlikely person, an unlikely subject taking on her own environment and patching together these things. For my colleague and myself, it's really important that this be seen as engineering and that it be seen in the same house with engineering, that it be seen to be doing the profound kinds of things that engineering purports to do. So we also have this manifesto that begins with the words like, this counts too. It's a kind of argument for us about why we honor this kind of engineering in what counts as assistive and adaptive technology, and who Cindy is in all this, kind of what Jason Nolan would call user-initiated design, not just user-centered. So that's engineering at home. The one other project that I'll show you is this is a kind of ongoing, a new iteration in this ongoing project that I have about ramps, and this is a low-profile ramp design that I designed a few years ago that is intended for both skateboarders and wheelchair users. And I won't tell you all the features there, but the single-step ramp is a big access problem in cities like New York and Boston and Toronto, all kinds of places. But what I'm mostly interested in is the weird Venn diagram between kind of play in the city and cultural access and wheeled mobility that's marginalized, that actually has a lot in common but are never thought in the same story together, because skateboarding is told as a kind of athletic, virtuosic story, and wheelchair use as a kind of medical tragedy. I'm kind of interested in undoing some of that. So I have this project kind of ongoing about ramps, slope intercept. And then I just had a collaboration with this wheelchair dancer named Alice Shepard, based here in New York and also in the Bay Area, who has a professional dance practice. And so she came to Olin for what we call there a micro-residency, to work with students around a particular ramp design brief. So Alice came and kind of talked to my students about her practice. She sort of showed what it is that she can do expressively like this with wheels and using her balance in an incredibly sophisticated way. Here on a flat surface, these dance tiles that we set up. And then over the course of a couple of days, we kind of did an audit of our built environment on campus, and she showed us a lot about the sophisticated way in which she's deploying the mechanics of the wheelchair. And I should say, this class was actually not a design class, and certainly not an arts class. It was a mechanics, like a physics, intro to physics class that she housed this in. And then so students did like motion capture in our motion capture studio to really try to understand where is her center of mass when she's up and down on the chair, and she can do really quite incredibly elegant and beautiful things in this kind of integrated gear. So then my students ended up building, using those low-profile ramps that I showed you, but also a couple of other prototypes that they built to try to understand her movement, and she kind of choreographed to that movement. And then the students, it just kind of, the project exploded, and then they built this like enormous ramp landscape for Alice to come back and to dance on and to choreograph for. These are first-year students, 18-year-olds, like the fabrication, the CAD, all of it was kind of way out at the cusp of their capacities, but they were, it was a kind of magic of having a real-life collaborator and a truly authentic set of projects. And to be doing physics, for expressive ends, it's like really not an access ramp at all, and really not a solutionary kind of project, but really a kind of expressive physics. So just a couple of other. And so, sorry, this is a dancer, her collaborator, Laurel Lawson, with Alice. So then they just, did this. Here, I'll just show you, because they make it look so easy, but.
I'm actually looking at the episode. Wow, she didn't manage to fall that time.
I'll just play it again in case it is a little more.
I'm actually looking at the episode. Wow, she didn't manage to fall that time.
Right, so it's like, on the one hand, it's really quite low profile, but you can imagine the kind of control that it takes to actually do exactly what you want and no more on just 4 feet is the highest ramp there. But it was a beautiful thing to see students create really a kind of ramped condition and landscape in mechanics and engineering school. It was a beautiful thing. So in keeping with the theme, I think of my work as hacking the tradition of rehabilitation engineering. That's the home of prosthetics and assistive technology. That model of rehabilitation, I think, is a little overly freighted and problematic for us. And hacking solutioneering, trying to mix use and non-use in the same kind of breath, and making products that aren't really meant for scale. So we can talk about that if you like. Thanks.
So I'm just going to return the compliment. I'm a huge fan of Sarah's. And I also want to thank, is this getting a lot of feedback? I think maybe it's this time. Luke and Carolyn for organizing this. And Luke forgot to mention that we just got our disability studies minor approved, in which the Abilities Lab here is going to play a very central role. So, yay, we're really excited about that. Let me go back here.
There are like 3 in the whole country.
Yeah, well, yeah,
more than that now?
but not very many, that have an Abilities Lab like we have here. So we're really excited. So I think I have a slightly different approach. Sadly, I'm not a designer or a programmer, but I do work in moving image media, and a lot of it is on digital platforms. My work is really, I guess I want to think of it as like hacking culture. Like, I'm interested in how interventions are being made in cultural spaces that until quite recently have not been inclusive whatsoever, just for the lack of the kind of imagination that Sara has demonstrated. And so some of this will just be moving into more public institutions. I'm in the middle of writing a book called Disability, Personhood, and the New Normal with my colleague Rena Rapp. So we're looking at a variety of sites, and I'm the one who gets to do the kind of arts and culture and digital media stuff. I feel like we have a really shared commitment to many things, and one of them is to this idea that the disability scholar Alison Kafer writes about, called accessible futures. Like, what does it mean to have an accessible future? And that the futurity of the idea of disability is kind of actually despised in our culture. Nobody says, I can't wait to grow up and be disabled, or to imagine a future with that. And yet, in fact, almost all of us will get there, if sooner rather than later, whichever. So I think it's really part of the legacy of the ADA, and then all these kinds of imaginative practices to change the cultural location of that. And I really recommend her book, Feminist Queer Crip, if you want to kind of get a sense of her writing about that. Okay, that's, I think, all my little notes. So I'm just going to talk about a few examples I've been working on in my own work, and some of these I do as a kind of supportive player, sometimes as a volunteer, or occasionally as a producer. You'll see some of the things. So this is a project that's started in New York City around 26 years ago. It arose with the ADA, called the Museum Access Consortium. Anybody familiar with that? Okay, it's pretty much every cultural institution in the city is now part of this. It's an incredibly lively project that's saying, how do we make our cultural institutions, everything from the Metropolitan Museum to the Brooklyn Historical Society down the block to the Transit Museum, accessible to many people who have not been imagined as audiences: blind, deaf, wheelchair users, autism, people with developmental disabilities, people who don't act, in quotes, appropriately in public, which is many of us. And they started out very small with a project called Art Beyond Sight. So they were trying to say, how do we make our exhibits, actually people, curators and educators at the Guggenheim Museum, to say, how do we make people who can't actually see able to enjoy art? And so a lot of this has to do with descriptive technologies, with touch, with a whole range of really interesting ways that, it's really only about imagination and having the opportunity to do this. Of course, also once museums got and cultural institutions got the message that this would improve their audiences, and that there's, really a lot of people who are hugely grateful and willing to bring their groups there and so forth, that actually helped a lot. Another set of audiences are, for example, people with Alzheimer's, who really have very few kind of cultural locations to go to, and museums are actually really wonderful locations for them, or other cultural institutions, because they can encounter a beautiful work of art or an interesting and intriguing project and be engaged with that in the moment without having the anxiety of forgetting and memory loss and so forth. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the examples of that. This is MoMA's new initiative for older adults called Prime Time, which includes particular programs for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and so forth, but in general, having programs and support for people who are at that end of the life spectrum. This is the Transit Museum does a lot of transit education for people with developmental disabilities, autism, and other kinds of projects. So these are kind of like hacking in museum and cultural spaces, because being able to navigate all the noise and sensory input of the subway and transportation system here, it's like, if you are like fully loaded with your sensory system, it's challenging enough. But if these are things that are going to be very overwhelming, that opportunity to kind of rehearse and try out and have a lot of very a kind of guided opportunity to do this. This is a classroom with mostly kids on the spectrum going through the Transit Museum. So I'm just giving you a sense of the different kinds of locations. And all of these actually take advantage of all kinds of hacking and technologies to incorporate people. So just a little bit. This is a vlog project from the Whitney, where they have a wonderful project. Everything's online within ASL. So if you're deaf and you want to have some education about what you could come to see at the Whitney, you can actually put that on your phone as you walk through the museum, for example. So that's another one. And then this is an interesting thing that's sort of become like a kind of a new practice. Sarah and I were talking about this just before we came in. It's called social narratives, or you were calling it social stories. So these are for people who may have sensory issues or cognitive issues that make the space of any kind of a new kind of visit to a cultural institution of any sort challenging. So this is actually an opportunity for people to sit and look at like all the things that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily, more typical people might not think about, like a guard is going to actually look through your stuff and you're going to cross a very busy street. So a lot of the things that we just put in the background of the experience where actually might be sufficiently challenging to someone so they'll turn around and leave before they even get in through the front door are part of the way people are sort of figuring. So these again are very simple kinds of hacks into the experience of moving around in the cultural world. So that's a longstanding project full of creativity happening all the time. They're always meeting and thinking about new projects. I recommend going onto their website. They have workshops all the time. So this is another initiative that started up a bit later, but it's very much has roots from the Museum Access Consortium, and this is the Autism Theater Initiative, and I work with them as a researcher and a volunteer, and this is my hat. So around 2010, a lot of people in the autism world were saying, you know, so many people in our community really love going to the theater. They know all the songs, you know, especially anything with Disney, but they feel very overwhelmed. People look askance at people who flap or stim or make a lot of noise that is not considered appropriate by other audience members. So unlike other ideologies of inclusion, so that we have signers or other people so that you can be included in an audience with a diverse kind of embodied folks in the audience. With people with autism, they came up with this plan to actually adjust theater going in New York so that people who might be alarmed by the levels of noise, by certain kind of lighting, by not having a place where you can go and actually just kind of de-stim yourself. So they have, I meant to bring my bag with all the toys, but they have, so that every year they pick a different musical and have a few performances where it's particularly adapted for people on the spectrum and their loved ones. And so they do things like, so the lights are changed, the actors are, when this particular performance that I went to, that's my photo, people from the audience were throwing things on stage and yelling, whatever. The child actors were amazing. They didn't blink an eye. Nobody minded at all. They have areas around the bathrooms where there's like padding and what they call fidget toys. Let me see, I forgot my fidget toy slide, I'm sorry. But they have all these really fun fidget toys. And one of the things they learned actually over the years is that they actually have laminated maps that you give out as a volunteer, which say these are the restaurants in the neighborhood that are friendly. Because there are so many people that, of course, want to go out and have a meal afterwards. They've had this really wonderful experience, and their loved ones make noise or do inappropriate things or scream or whatever. Anyway, so they've actually gone around and educated people in the neighborhood, and they've made these wonderful little low-tech laminated maps that go in their bag and say these are people that you should patronize because they really know who you are and they will welcome you and so forth. So very interesting just to think about the different kinds of interventions people need to make. Excuse me. So now I'm just going to move into, it's just David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder, wonderful scholars who've thought a lot about film and film festivals. They are also filmmakers. So I was on the founding committee of a festival that we have every year called Real Abilities. It's in, oh, thank you, yay. Oh, right, I saw you at the body workshop, yeah. So this is from the opening night film. Max and Mary is a fantastic claymation film that almost won, I think it did win an Oscar, or it was up for an Oscar for a foreign film from Australia, if people know Adam Elliott. He's been, anyway, and that character is like an old Jewish Holocaust survivor who has agoraphobia, who becomes friends with a girl in Australia who has her own anxieties. It's quite charming. But anyway, so we have a model where we make the films that we've chosen for the year available to any other venue in the area. So we have, I think, 38 offsite locations. We also have many cities that it goes to. But I think the point I wanted, this is just another one with a lot of Wounded Warrior projects, is thinking about the space of theaters and who's there and who's not. We were just talking about what we do with our students. I say one of the things I love to do is send my students to a real ability screening. And this particular one, there were, if you can see here, there were 24 power chairs. Think about how much space it is to have 24 power chairs in a room. Signers, CART technology, right, where people type, and you see that on the wall. So, because not everybody knows American Sign Language who might have hearing issues. We also have audio description for people with, does everyone know what audio description is? So if you have limited vision, you go to the movies, you can get a special headset that has a special soundtrack that works along with, so complementary to the actual soundtrack of the film that helps you know what's going on visually in the film. Like a butterfly goes across the screen and Sandy flies after it or whatever. It's just little bits of, just better than that, believe me. But fine art to it. Yeah, it's actually is an incredible skill. It's a really interesting kind of technology. And what you can't see here are people with dogs and a very high tolerance for noise and partially out of control behavior. So there's a lot of difference in that. And then I ask the students, okay, now just go to your theater down the street and see, who's not there and why are they not there, and to just make them aware of like how much the infrastructure of theatrical space and the infrastructures of the technologies of film viewing are so limited and exclusionary. So those are just things to think about. And it's been really, really, really interesting to do the festival because we have had to, as we say, crip a lot of theaters throughout the city and get different folks to think about it. And the minute that happens, that people then tend to understand that they've got to really take this kind of project on more, not just when we have these films with a particular audience in mind, but with all audiences. I've got two more examples here. So this is my daughter Sam with the photographer Rick Gododi, who has a really incredible project called Positive Exposure. Anybody here know about this project? So Rick is formerly a fashion photographer, and through an encounter with a young woman with albinism who he met on the street and was really taken with her, how beautiful she was, and realized he never saw her in places like fashion magazines. He completely transformed his life and started a big worldwide project looking at people with albinism here and showing their beauty using sort of his capacity as a fashion photographer to show them in the ways that other the kinds of memes and tropes of fashion photography, and then ended up going to Africa where there are huge human rights issues about people with albinism because their organs are considered supernaturally valuable. So he's been on a whole campaign about that, and then transfer that into the whole world of genetic difference, which goes from everything from like my daughter with a very rare condition, familial dysautonomia, to other genetically based differences, for example, Down syndrome. It's actually extended into autism because they're looking now at the genetics of autism. But what he's really trying to do is do an intervention or hack into the world of medical photography, which mostly is still truly hideous. If you look at medical textbooks of any particular condition, they usually have like a really horrible black and white photograph with a bar over someone's eyes, so like the humanity of that person is erased. And I'm actually involved with a lot of projects of educating medical residents. It's called Project Doc. A lot of parents with children with chronic illness spend time working with them they actually come to our houses to see how we live when we come home from the hospital, because medical residents are very young. They've barely passed puberty as far as I'm concerned. They don't really have very much life experience in actually understanding the humanity of the people they work with, and they're not just a bundle of symptoms with very particular ways of treating them. They're actually, and often that you need to be, finding solutions. So my daughter has very dry eyes, as all people do with familial dysautonomia, and they prescribe these horrible goggles to wear at night. Nobody could sleep with them. And through a parent-to-parent network, we learned that saran wrap with surgical tape is really excellent in place of goggles. So things like that. But also really, the real issue is the question of humanity. So I'm just going to show you a little bit from, this is a very short clip from a film made about his work called On Beauty. And it has my favorite quote from him. He's a really interesting guy. I produce some little films with him these days. So what this gives you. Oops, it's not. It was picking up before. Here we go. Oops, we've lost sound. We had it before. Sorry, we had it. I'm just gonna go back. Oh, poo. Okay, sorry.
Either you're going to just stick the mic on the computer speaker, or you're going to put it through the HDMI.
Are we ready? Everybody ready? I can't hear you!
People stare. Are we really so different and not like you that you have to stare?
For me, I want to become a doctor, so I need to be able to get into residency. That's my biggest challenge right now, to get into residency. All I need is a stool. People might think, oh, my challenge is short stature, but honestly, maybe that's your challenge, but not mine.
Rick got a big check for a photograph.
All fashion professions are diabolic. They're not a breeding ground for people with hearts or souls.
I'm looking at the camera and I'm thinking, I don't even have to be here. This is not what I want to be doing.
I had never thought of the power of a photograph as in the impact it would have in someone's life. We are not ghost-like, we are just human beings.
But I can assure you that no one has ever walked into a doctor's office looking like this. With like carrying a portable black bar. Train those physicians to see beyond the disease.
Nothing standard will ever be beautiful. Almost boring and uninteresting.
I've given up on the idea of a fashion magazine running photographs of Rick's, and I hope I'm wrong.
Nobody jumped on board. People were still looking at this as an art form. You didn't understand that this was a human movement.
You're gonna die when you see this.
It was the first time I had somebody tell me how beautiful he was. He took pictures of him the way I saw him. Not the way everybody else saw him, but the way I saw him.
Often when I'm photographing someone with a difference, somebody will come and see the photographs and say, you're really capturing their inner beauty. And I'm like, fuck inner beauty. These kids are gorgeous.
Fuck inner beauty, because it's just such a great line. It's not about, it's actually like seeing the diversity of humanity as in fact beautiful. Sorry, that slide shouldn't be here. So now I'm just going to move. My last two examples are, I think, very interesting ways in which the digital platforms have enabled certain kinds of folks with disabilities to have opportunities to represent themselves in ways that have really not been available before. And in particular, people with autism who don't have verbal speech but have speech capacity have often been completely misunderstood, imagined to not have any intelligence, and been, put into really seriously scary environments. This particular person, Amanda Baggs, launched a video on YouTube. She was among the first people to do this in 2007. Anybody familiar with Amanda Baggs? Seen her stuff? So I'm just going to show a very short clip from. She has it's a 9-minute. It's a 9-minute short film on YouTube that she created with friends called "In My Language." She doesn't have verbal speech. She uses, in this case, you see a Dynavox. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Dynavox. I'm like, I'm not speaking English. Okay. Machine that allows her to type and have a synthesized voice. It's pretty much being phased out now by iPads, but was still in use in 2007. So I just want to give you a quick sense of how this kind of simple digital platform has become an incredible enabler of the possibility of certain kinds of dialogue and recognition to take place across boundaries of difference. So she now goes by Mel. this to the last part where you see she comes in, this is called a translation. And she's talking a little bit about, like, this is not symbolic of anything, it's just me playing with water. That's what I like to do. Let me get to, all right, so here I'm going to
Much more limited set of responses and only react to a much more limited part of my surroundings. People claim that I am opening up to true interaction with the world. They judge my existence, awareness, and personhood on which of a tiny and limited part of the world I appear to be reacting to. The way I naturally think and respond to things looks and feels so different from standard concepts or even visualization that some people do not consider it thought at all, but it is a way of thinking in its own right. However, the thinking of people like me is only taken seriously if we learn your language, no matter how we previously thought or interacted. As you heard, I can sing along to what is around me. It is only when I type something in your language that you refer to me as having communication. I smell things. I listen to things. I feel things. I taste things. I look at things. It is not enough to look and listen and taste and smell and feel. I have to do those to the right things, such as look at books, and fail to do them to the wrong things, or else people doubt that I am a thinking being. And since their definition of thought defines their definition of personhood so ridiculously much, they doubt that I am a real person as well. I would like to honestly know how many people, if you met me on the street, would believe I wrote this. I find it very interesting, by the way, that failure to learn your language is seen as a deficit, but failure to learn my language is seen as so natural that people like me are officially described as mysterious and puzzling, rather than anyone admitting that it is themselves who are confused, not autistic people or other cognitively disabled people who are inherently confusing. We are even viewed as non-communicative if we don't speak the standard language, but other people are not considered non-communicative if they are so oblivious to our own languages as to believe they don't exist. In the end, I want you to know that this has not been intended as a voyeuristic freak show where you get to look at the bizarre workings of the autistic mind. It is meant as a strong statement on the existence and value of many different kinds of thinking and interaction in a world where how close you can appear to a specific one of them determines whether you are seen as a real person, or an adult, or an intelligent person, and in a world in which those determine whether you have any rights. There are people being tortured, people dying, because they are considered non-persons, because their kind of thought is so unusual as to not be considered thought at all. Only when the many shapes of personhood are recognized will justice and human rights be possible.
So you can see what an extraordinary opportunity that platform has provided for someone like that. And when that first was launched in 2007, which was the early days for YouTube, she got unbelievable attention. CNN, Sanjay Gupta went to her home. But it had a huge impact just in terms of really informing people about the linguistic and communication issues that people who don't have verbal speech face, who also don't have typical kinds of ways of interacting with their environment. So, and the fact that she could do that, she could govern that space herself and do it with, she had people helping her do it, but that was very much her project. Was just a huge breakthrough. And I think without that kind of digital technology, people like Amanda haven't really would not really be able to have the kind of lives that they're able to have in terms of connecting up with huge networks of people worldwide. Also, for a lot of people with autism, having face-to-face interaction is very anxiety-producing, even though people desire social interaction of other sorts. So the fact that you can disambiguate the face-to-face interaction from speech, and you can have communication that's delayed, and all those kinds of things that make it easier to control the different elements of speech and communication have been really important. So just to end things, to show you where we are 9 years later, this was launched on April 29th. It's a segment of an online, it's launched on YouTube. It's called Speechless with Carly Fleischman. Has anybody encountered it? It's gotten picked up in the press a bit. So this is another autistic woman. She's 21, and you'll see her. And she, I hope I can get onto the internet here. And she is very verbal, but she doesn't have oral speech. And she really wanted to have a talk show, and she has created this talk show, which is why she calls it Speechless. So I'm hoping we can get, please. I did not check this ahead of time. Are we on the internet?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, so it should be. Okay, because maybe I'll just get out of this and go right to the internet then if this is not coming up. Okay, yeah, sorry. After all that build up, let me see if I can. Yeah. You could actually just type in Speechless with Carly. Sorry. So she lives in Toronto, and okay, so I'm just going to show you a little bit. Her first.
I would like to introduce you to my first guest ever. He has been a stripper, a police officer, a secret agent, a reporter, a boyfriend to many, and soon he will dump his wife to be with me. I welcome Channing Tatum. How about that, Channing? Would you date a 21-year-old person with autism?
Yes, if I got permission from my wife.
All right, I've got my lawyers working on your divorce papers as we speak. Now, even though I'm in love with you, I do realize you are married. You've been very candid about how she is your everything. If she likes fairies, then you believe that fairies exist. One thing does she believe in that she don't buy into as of yet?
There's these like things that she buys at like what's called the Aura shop in Santa Monica. They have like BBs in them, and they're supposed to like I have really no idea. I just go, that one I can't get into that one.
Rumor has it that when you were a child living at home, you used to sneak out of the house.
Okay, you can see the whole thing if you want. But just to give you an idea, she's very clever. She has her interview questions very lined up. So I think it's just interesting to see where it's come like 9 years later, and she already has over 2.5 million views, and it was launched on April 29th. So something's happening there. So, okay, so we wanted to be sure we had some time to open up to questions or talk. So.
Question. You briefly mentioned when you were talking about accessibility in art museums, you mentioned touch, and I was curious if you could expand on that a bit.
Sure. So the Art Beyond Sight people have been, trying to think of as many ways as possible to involve the other senses in that. So, for example, at the Met, they have a whole touch tour. So if you go through, for example, the Temple of Dendur, where they have the Egyptian hieroglyphics, they have a whole area where you can actually touch the hieroglyphics, and you can go. You have a guided tour, an audio tour through headphones, and so usually those tend to involve like sculpture or things like that or other objects. I know in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden they have a smell garden section, so they try and work with the different senses that can be accessed by people who don't have vision.
I think a lot of people who've done sort of front-end design work, user-facing things, have encountered the economic challenge of encouraging accessible design. It's expensive. What are the fulcrums being leveraged at this point in moving some of those conversations and actual design paradigms forward?
Yeah. Is this actually on? I couldn't tell when you were talking. Are you hearing me projected here?
I think the volume is.
I think it's actually like, no. Oh.
Hello?
Are the mics working?
But it's turned it down for the music on the.
It's just a good access practice to use a mic, so I'm just trying to be. Okay.
But you had
I mean, right. I was actually just with a bunch of software developers who were talking about this kind of. I was part of it. There's teachaccess.org is an initiative by a bunch of software.
Sorry about
Like
Yeah, there you go.
Yahoo and Facebook and Google and folks like this got a bunch of people together from higher ed also to say, what about this? So like we're trying to do accessible kinds of products, but either it doesn't survive in the kind of iterations of the actual of really getting it to market, or it doesn't survive the update to the product, or and then also even if we train our people with the skills to create accessible products, again, the technology will outpace it, or those people get promoted and go on. So it's not about a skill set so much as it is about a disposition to try to create creative access. I frankly just think we don't. I suppose it's expensive until you look at things like the OXO kitchen tools and those adaptive Fisker scissors and the one-handed zipper that Under Armour licensed. And all those were extreme user cases. Those are kind of classic universal design cases. And maybe you can say, well, those are too few and far between. But I think if people take it's not about kind of codes and compliance culture. And that's what I think drives so much of industrial design now. It's like, okay, well, now I'm going to think about people who are deaf. Now I'm going to think about people who are blind. And can I check these boxes? And can I add extensions and appendages to this thing to make it accessible? But if you have people steeped and versed enough in trying to think about people at the kind of superlative edges of human experience and really use those as design inspirations, I think that disposition, I just think it's underexplored, to be honest. I just think it's underexplored because I think that people either think like, okay, now I'm gonna, like an architect with an ugly ramp on a building, like, oh yeah, I gotta do that thing. I gotta like stick that thing on my masterpiece. And I think instead of thinking, what's the design opportunity here? So at least in my classroom, I'm trying to say, look, the technology is going to change next year and the year after that and the year after that. What I need you to be thinking about is like the living, pulsing human being in all its forms. Get comfortable talking to people who are not like you, and then see it as an opening, as a portal, an opportunity. So, sorry, that's kind of high level, but I just think it's under researched. So.
To add to that, I think that it's like your ramp project. I mean, it's not just like people in wheelchairs and skateboarders. It's like people with shopping carts and people who happen to have broken their leg, or people with strollers. I mean, the need for these things. So there's this idea that disability and access and the accessible hacks that need to be done are like over here in this box, and that's not economical, et cetera. I mean, like all the stuff they've introduced into museum settings. The audience return is huge. The popularity, so there's a kind of look, we have closed captioning now on all our television. Thank you, ADA. That also supplied a huge amount of work for people who, everyone's got to be doing that. And Sarah has to say something about that.
Oh my God! People said it'll never happen. It's too expensive. It can't be done. You literally cannot put a cent. Quantity on what it takes to build in the closed captioning under television now. At scale, it is literally unrepresentable. But if you talk to Larry Goldberg, who's running Teach Access at Yahoo now, he said that at the time it was kind of like, oh my God, this is so insurmountable, we'll never get there kind of thing. So it takes like the ADA and legislation, but it also takes imagination. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that was great. No, that's why we're here together. Yeah, we're totally on the same page on that. No, it's so much of it is cultural attitudes, and also, frankly, why do we have characters with autism, Down syndrome, and an entire series where half the characters are actually deaf, are deaf and are played by deaf actors, and where they're signing and camera operators have to learn how to reframe shooting because they have to shoot for hands and things like that. Guess what? Because everybody's having that experience. Disability is a very equal opportunity experience, and the more that people realize it should be in the public sphere, however, whether that means the infrastructure or particular aspects of design or representational politics, the more it's going to get out there. So I think that question of cost is just like a false fetish.
Yeah. And I'm also really excited by things like Spoken Layer. That's like a plugin that magazines are using to take visual magazine content right now, and then they contract with readers to do kind of broadcast quality readings of those things. So like Time magazine now is partnered with Spoken Layer, and that to me is just like a paradigmatic inversion. You go like, why should the web be so predominantly visual when you could when lots of commuters want to consume the exact political commentary that they want, but broadcast quality and not in the robo voice of this kind of thing. And that's a really viable model. Will Mayo, who started that, is dyslexic, grew up listening to audiobooks, and so he just took his kind of extreme user experience and went, oh, the inherited conditions of the world are not what they have to be. Like, it's just, but that kind of bravery, I think, is what we need a lot more.
And so many older people, let's not forget, like, are users of that kind of technology. Like my dad, who's 97, would love to read Time magazine, can't really see that well anymore, but he can definitely, I mean, so these are like, the audiences are everywhere for this, because, the potential give back on these technologies.
Right. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a great talk. I saw a talk from Dr. Joshua Miele. He's a blind physicist doing kind of like the Blind Arduino project is his latest project. And one of the things that he mentioned was, and this is kind of related to this gentleman's question, but not about cost, but about design thinking, because I think he gave a scenario during his talk about how he went to IDEO and they said, okay, let's get our design session started, and then Dr. Miele said, okay, well, how are we going to start this? And he goes, what did you bring for us? And they brought Post-its, like colored Post-its, and he goes, okay, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. Mm-hmm. And everyone, and they were like horrified, because this is IDEO, okay? And then so like, a lot of his talk was discussing and presenting how he changed design thinking to include able, disabled in those conversations. So I'm curious, in the research that you conducted, both of you, what have you noticed around understanding that language? Because even Dr. Miele, and he said, I just want people to talk to me like I'm sighted. But there's this really strange language around that. And so I'm curious, well, what have you seen over time that can really loosen that up? You've already kind of said the answer about social attitude, but if you've seen anything else, because I mean, I also want to volunteer in that community as well, and I'd love to know.
I think some of the museum practices are probably a good leader for this, right? Like you were just describing. Did you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, so I think some of these sort of like, what's the Smithsonian has the 3D model of the Big Bang, like what can be made tactile? Also, I suppose, like the IDEO thing, design thinking, right, rests on the notion that ideas up here in the abstract are worth nothing. It's only what you can represent. Well, but so representation can be audio as easily as it can be visual, right? What you're really what's the real goal there? The goal is to try to take that airy diffuse thing, and there's a big goal from here to this, your airy diffuse thing in your head. Like, how can we get it out together and start to give it shape and form? That need not be visual. It's our first default because it just is a primacy of sight and so on. I predict you'd see just as much, you would understand just as much if you made that into a deeply descriptive audio process, made a kind, actually with Alice, who is the wheelchair dancer, we had to do a co-design on Skype, and the students thought of like both of us having Sculpey in our hands so that we could, because like the ramp, that morphology is so difficult to describe. Well, like how much of an incline, and like where's the curve, and like convex, and where's the banking condition and stuff. So they said, why don't we both bring Sculpey and try to do it in real time together? I guess I'm just thinking like, oh, it's easy enough to just make a mold of a thing you can hold. Anyway.
Yeah. So the only thing I'll add, and maybe this is a point of closure, because I can see Carolyn is giving us the smiley but firm look, which is it's also politics. So it's 25 years since the ADA passed. And although there was prior legislation that mandated that all children had to be educated, which was not true. When I was a kid, I saw no people with disabilities in my neighborhood in South Chicago. They were all hidden. They were not required to go to school. I mean, I was horrified. Like when my daughter was born, I was like, how could I get to be this age, which I was then, and not have had contact? And now I'm seeing, so people are growing up in an entirely different world. I mean, my students are coming in and they grew up in a post-ADA world, and they take it for granted that people should be included. And when they realize, so I think that we're seeing a kind of cultural change. I mean, what happens post high school, because the mandate for inclusion ends then, right? So then most of that is now emerging out of people's creativity, private sector, enterprise, huge amount of work being done by families of and loved ones and allies who are just coming up with creative solutions to problems, whether they be design or the creation of an amazing program that occurs in New York City called Daniel's Music Foundation, free music classes for anyone from age 3 to age 100, whatever their disability. It's an astonishing project. It's completely diverse, and I was like, why? Because the parents, one of whom was a music teacher, said this was what allowed our son after a coma, accident, blah, 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 come back to life. We can do this. So, so a lot of it is, I think the culture is changing just because the legislation has really changed the experiential humanity that people have and their expectations about what should be part of the world. So, thank you.